Good morning. Thank you for joining us at the 22nd Annual Acquisition Research Symposium and Innovation Summit hosted by the Acquisition Research Program at the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to Panel 16, Strategic Space Acquisition, Research, Production, and Agile Practices. I'm Major General Steve Butow, Military Deputy and Space Portfolio Director for the Defense Innovation Unit. I'll be chairing this panel. The mission of DIU, or the Defense Innovation Unit, is to accelerate the adoption of commercial technology for national security and defense at speed and scale. We do this by empowering teams across 8 different domain and technology portfolios to curate problems identified by the warfighter, and then create opportunities for innovative companies to demonstrate commercial solutions that have the highest potential of solving them. Our process is innovator-driven, through iterative experimentation, challenges, and prototypes, leveraging other transaction agreements structured as fully negotiable commercial contracts. DIU focuses relentlessly on solving the most strategic problems with new, emergent, and often disruptive technologies, such as artificial intelligence, autonomy, cyber, quantum, and of course, space capabilities, all stemming from the commercial technology sector. Our objective is to provide U.S. and allied forces with asymmetric advantage, assuring our collective ability to deter, defend, and win future conflicts if forced to fight. This panel will explore the topic of strategic space acquisition through the lens of research, production, and agile practices. There's no better time to do so, given an intensifying space race with China, an increasingly belligerent Russia, and the president's renewal of the Space Defense Initiative, now called Golden Dome, to protect the homeland. Space is a contested environment that holds great economic potential for current and future generations. The greatest innovations in space technology today are privately funded and accelerating at commercial pace. We must take full advantage of space innovation and new proliferated architectures that retain technological relevance through software and hardware agility enabled by adaptive manufacturing. Exquisite solutions do not scale and are most vulnerable and difficult to replace. The rate of change of technology today is too steep to simply sustain acquisition and production practices of the past. Now is the time for action, and I am confident that this panel will contribute to our shared understanding of how to unlock this future. We are pleased to have students from the Naval Postgraduate School's Space Systems Academic Group with us on the line today. DIU is a proud partner with the NPS. Teaming and activities have included collaboration on long-range autonomy and connectivity for unmanned surface vessels, as well as industry engagements for satellite communications integration into the naval fleet to enhance long-range lethality. DIU hosted a Space Global Partnership Summit at NPS in 2023, and we have supported student research with Dr. Jennifer Hudson on space logistics, robotics, modeling, and simulation projects focused on rendezvous and proximity operations. On 30 May, we look forward to our next visit with the NPS Space Operations and Systems Engineering students to join us on site at our DIU campus in Mountain View, California. We will begin with some opening remarks, followed by presentations from each of our panelists, and conclude with a Q&A session. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll sort through those. We will address your questions after all presentations have concluded. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Grinch Thomason, Chair of Space Systems Engineering and Acquisition at the NPS. Go ahead, Grinch.
General Butow, thank you. It's very good to see you again, sir. And we look forward to seeing you at the end of the month as well. Appreciate you chairing this panel today and the daily work of the team at DIU and the space portfolio. I am Thomason, go by Grinch. I am the Chair for Space Systems Engineering and Acquisition and a lecturer at the Naval Postgraduate School. We have 2 curriculum. We have Space Systems Operations and Space Systems Engineering, as well as a variety of multidisciplinary students who join our curriculum. We've talked this past week about a lot of the industrial base and the speed of the industrial base. And I think that we will see that moving forward with our briefs today for our panelists. I really look forward to those panelist briefs as well. Some things that I'd like to highlight was Rear Admiral Rothenhaus, who mentioned the SBIR as being a rising tide for our services and how do we speed acquisitions. We'll hear about that from our panelists today. One of the things that I hear very often with our students is access to proliferated non-geostationary orbit satellite communication. But oftentimes what they don't understand is the background and the deep history and the research and engineering that has gone into that to make that accessible. And we'll hear about that a bit today as well. Things like the CSSC2 contract, major improvements, increment 3 for the STING program, these types of services out to the fleet, oftentimes our operators use them, but they might not be aware. And so this is an opportunity for our panelists to share some of the background on how does that actually get out to the fleet at speed. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our panelists. I believe Mr. Vince Squitieri is our first panelist, I think. So, Vince, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Grinch, and thank you very much, General Butow, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to participate in this forum. Acquisition and Research Symposium is something that I've regularly participated in and attended, and always found it to be very informative. My background: I am the technical director for the Navy's PEO C4I PMW A 170 program office, which does Navy satellite communications and GPS navigation systems. My job as technical director is to oversee all of the science and technology efforts, including the SBIR and STTR programs, and to identify and canvass emergent technologies that are candidate technologies for tech insertion into our program of records. And broadly on the satellite communication side, we field traditional military satellite communication systems that leverage satellites like AEHF, WGS, etc., Milstar, and a number of years ago launched a commercial broadband satellite program as an augmentation to MilSatcom, and I'm going to talk about the evolution and emergence of commercial SATCOM as well. We also field GPS navigation systems for the fleet and are also interested in alternate and assured PNT solutions. On the next slide, you're going to see a sort of by way of background, the basic satellite orbit types in geosynchronous orbit, MEO, middle Earth orbit, and low Earth orbit. So traditionally, legacy systems, particularly many of the MilSatcom, AHF, WGS, were in geosynchronous orbit. And you can see from the pictorial, much higher elevation at 35,000 plus feet. So many fewer satellites are required to achieve global coverage. As you move down to the middle Earth orbit, you get much closer to the Earth, and so more satellites are required to get a full global coverage. So you have satellite systems like GPS constellation system that's in there. But the real focus and emergence in the commercial industry world has been the proliferation of the low Earth orbit satellite constellations, with SpaceX in the form of Starlink leading the way. And the contrast there is much lower Earth orbit. It certainly requires many more satellites to achieve global coverage, but there is resiliency and flexibility in being able to operate at a low Earth orbit. More satellites give much more flexibility from a comms perspective. You get reduced latencies and reduced power requirements in order to close the link. As we move on to the next slide, we can see that SpaceX has really revolutionized the space industry with their development of launch vehicles. And so the traditional United Allied launch kind of approach to launching satellites has been disrupted with this. They have utilized these launch vehicles to populate the SpaceX satellite constellation, the Starlink satellite constellation, rather, with the Falcon 9s, and their ability to launch as many as 3 launches a week with multiple constellations has enabled them to quickly populate a significant number of satellites in the constellation. And as they are constantly working on upgrading capabilities, they are able to, with each generation, target key enhancements and capabilities of those satellites as they launch generations to keep them refreshed in a very efficient manner. And this methodology overcomes one of the challenges that we've had in the DoD, which is maintaining current capability, leveraging the latest with commercial technologies, and addressing obsolescence. And so by leveraging this, the tasker we had was in our commercial broadband satellite program is how can we leverage this this capability. As we go to the next slide, we can see just some statistics on constellation sizes across. SpaceX and Starlink certainly lead the way, but there has been a tremendous activity in this space, and so you can see the contrast in the number of satellites in 2020 to as we move forward today to 2025, and the emergence of other capabilities such as Eutelsat OneWeb from a European perspective, and Amazon Kuiper also has designs and plans on a very significant constellation. They have just recently successfully launched their initial satellites, and we are looking forward to another significant constellation of the scope, close to the scope and size of what Starlink is doing. And Kuiper is bringing some interesting capabilities that the DoD is very interested in, and we're looking to leverage those. I've touched on this before. You can see the LEO and MEO performance from a latencies perspective, and the real key element is the user data throughput rates that are much more significant than what we have been able to provide the fleet in the past. And when I get to the development of our Sting program, I'll talk about how that's impacted the fleet today. And then the global coverage with the optical inter-satellite links, I touch on that in future slides as well. Okay, transitioning to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more about the constellation, from a Starlink perspective. You can see the numbers from the generations. What I want to talk about is the fact that they're using the ESA steered antennas, and they're able to achieve 48 beams downlink, 16 beams uplink, and they're able to achieve that in 2 polarizations, right-hand circular and left-hand circular. And so and you look at the frequencies that they cover as well, and KUKA and S on some. So and then they're starting to pursue a 5G NTN capability on some that we're looking to leverage and explore as well. So we transition to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the optical inter-satellite links. When SpaceX first started, they were looking at a traditional construct of having gateways everywhere, and that was going to be a restriction for us because you had to be in the proximity of a shore gateway in order to close the data and get the backhaul, and we would have been restricted just to coastal areas. I'm going to talk about our collaboration with NPS in launching an engagement with industry called Slam Times, where we were able to convey our requirements to industry, and we had discussions with SpaceX regarding the desire to have open ocean coverage, and convey to them that this could be achieved if you implemented optical inter-satellite links. We were influential in having them look at the appropriate standard, OpenZR Plus, which is one that they adopted, and that then was implemented and alleviated the need of having to go through gateways. At one point in time, we were tracking like where all the gateways would be. That completely went away once they successfully implemented OISLs, and that was a good capability that the Navy was able to influence in their development. As we look at the next slide, I'm sure many of you are aware of the impact that Starlink has had in Ukraine. In many respects, the Starlink systems really was incredibly key and integral to the Ukrainian conflict and the ability for the Ukrainians to maintain command and control, maintain communications, maintain the ability for President Zelensky to be online when he needed to, and they were able to adapt some issues. They encountered some GPS jamming, and SpaceX was able to overcome that by a software change that enabled them to overcome that by entering their local position, and that achieved that. You can see some of the pictures there of the Starlinks in Ukraine with the number of users, and the photo on the bottom shows what the Ukrainians did. They started to put the terminals. They would dig out little holes for the terminals to avoid shrapnel from the incoming attacks, and that was another mechanism for them to enable for the systems to remain online. And we have learned a lot of great lessons from Ukraine on Starlink usage. As we transition to the next slide, I talked about our collaboration with NPS and how we developed an acquisition strategy to leverage. The task at hand was we already had a commercial broadband satellite program with traditionally procured satellite terminals that were used parabolic arrays that were interacting with GEO, Intelsat, Inmarsat constellations. The challenge before us was we want to leverage this incredible emerging capability that Starlink is providing. And so what we undertook is developing it's called a Sting terminal, and we did it via SIBR, and we established these technical interchange groups with industry in collaboration with NPS, who hosted a number of our engagements. And you can see the key priorities that the Navy had on capabilities. We call them priorities because we're technically requirements are in the domain of OPNAV and the JSIDS process. So we conveyed these, and we had tremendous influence in having them implement things like OISLs. We have them looking at things like broadcast capability to enable an MCON receive only. We've had them, we designed the terminal to leverage the constellations by 3U VPX cards, and they've been, each of the satellite vendors have been cooperative in developing those. And so this has been a key way for us to engage and leverage those capabilities. As we transition to the next slide, I want to get a little bit more into the specifics of the Sting program. It's the Satellite Terminal Transportable Non-Geostationary Terminal. It's the next generation, it's the fourth generation of CBSP terminals. It was designed to be transportable so that we could quickly field systems to the fleet. At this point, we have fielded initial increments of Sting on over 100 ships and have gotten tremendous positive feedback on the enhanced bandwidth. And for the tactical uses, we have had folks with this expanded and enhanced bandwidth come up with, and when you arm the fleet with a new capability, innovation takes over. And so they have looked to see how they can access various intel and other feeds to enhance and embellish their targeting solutions. And so there's all these applications that we had not even defined, but the fleet is going off and doing that. And when you look at these end of tour reports, they rave about the enhanced capability that this has provided them. The block on the right talks about the increments. The first increment was simply a Starlink terminal that was on the deck, and certainly many navies are doing that. With increment 1, we start to get it connected to the via ADNS into the tactical network that enables us to leverage tactical applications. And as we move to the increment 2 and the 2 wideband and 3 and 4, you can see the enhancements to capture additional bands. Our targets are KUKA, S-band to look at. Sorry, I apologize. Hopefully you can still hear me. We transition to the next slide, please. Okay, so let me talk about the Navy SATCOM focus areas. Again, key focus areas are leveraging advancements in satellite constellations for LEO and MEO, and HEO as well, and incorporating innovative modem technologies. One of the key capabilities that we're after is the ability to use Navy protected modems, which these satellite constellation providers have indicated that they are willing to support. Out of the box commercial bandwidth leasing, zero trust solutions for data transport. Many of the vendors have looked at that, supporting that as well. Ubiquitous transport, aid in transitioning to 5G NTN, solutions for legacy systems, and pre-planned product improvements. And then the other interest areas we've conveyed to industry: multi-beam arrays, multi-link baseband, creative linking strategies, to leasing strategies rather, to leverage that to the full extent, and open architectures. I'll close by saying this has been an excellent venture for us. It's been a very good collaboration with the Naval Postgraduate School, hosting our SLAM time events, SATCOM, LEO, and MEO technical interchange events. It's enabled us to collaborate and reach out to emerging commercial satellite industry, involve academia. We've involved NPS students. We have also reached out and involved Naval Academy students in our SLAM time events, and we have established a MOU with NPS to support Grinch in the space chair, and have funded a number of research projects at the master's level. So really appreciate that. With that, I'll close up and allow the transition to the next speaker. Thank you.
Well, thank you. With that, we'll transition to Andrew Berglund. Go ahead, Andrew.
Great, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you all, and thanks, Vince, for that presentation. You did me a great service by, I think, setting up a lot of the common terms that we'll talk about in this session. So I won't cover some of that, but it'll be really valuable for the rest of the presentation and discussion. So I am part of the Aerospace Corporation. So we operate an FFRDC that supports the space enterprise. Within Aerospace, I work for our Center for Space Policy and Strategy. So our role in the center is to do sort of strategic analysis and do unbiased research that sort of serves as a connection from the technical work that happens at Aerospace and these critical broader discussions about the future of space, the future of commercial innovation, the future of acquisition. So that's the role I'm serving in. I kind of have a policy background and sort of approach through the lens of defense acquisition policy. Early in my career, I was fortunate to do explosive ordnance disposal support at the Office of Naval Intelligence. So happy to be back amongst many in the naval community to have this important discussion. And I think part of this sort of space focus always has to come back to what we are trying to achieve, our support for the warfighter. And I think in particular right now, the demand signal from Indo-PACOM and that AOR. So I will jump right in. Go next slide. All right, but I won't cover this in detail because I think Vince set me up well. But but we're in this period of transitioning from, as General Butow talked about, kind of exquisite, large, small numbers of satellite constellations into these more commercial first proliferated systems. We're seeing that process happen because of increased threats, which is driving new warfighting concepts and sort of forcing us to adapt to these new architectures. I think the central piece of this is it creates new demands both on the defense industrial base, the space industrial base, and on the acquisition community overall. Those demands are sort of increased quantities of satellites and components, decreased timelines, so making deliveries more quickly, smaller satellites, so driving that form factor smaller to take advantage of launch capabilities that allow us to get more assets on orbit, and then new technologies. So having that pipeline of commercial innovation connected to space acquisition programs to ensure that we are delivering capability that is as close to the leading edge of commercial as we can get. I'll just note sort of the acronym large LEO constellations. So Vince sort of covered why LEO is important. That is also the framing for my presentation. There are important things happening in all orbits. LEO is significant, I think, because of the scaling challenge, and that'll be kind of the core component of what I'll talk about today. Before I move on, last point here is this shift is not kind of a temporal thing. This represents a long-term commitment to a new space architecture. This is driving what the future looks like. And so we really have to have, as an acquisition community, as a support community, I think have a sense of what that long-term commitment means and how it forces us to adapt to this new reality. So we'll continue on, next slide. So I have kind of structured this around two concepts. The first is operational utility. And I think at a basic level, we understand that acquisition programs go through this process of demonstrating that they work as intended, that they meet requirements, that they meet technical performance measures. But the shift to proliferated system kind of complicates that issue a bit. We have to become more confident and more comfortable measuring at the constellation performance level. And so those upfront acquisition decisions, how many quantities we're going to have in an architecture, what level of vendor competition we're going to drive to, are going to have a significant impact on those sort of downstream prototyping and fielding efforts, and then how we measure success, how we measure operational utility. And again, this represents kind of a conscious choice. So managing constellation performance becomes more challenging as we drive for competition. We all understand the value and what we're trying to achieve with having competition, having what we sometimes refer to as sort of a marketplace of vendors that are competitive for these types of awards. But that does increase the challenge, right? Vince talked about optical intersatellite links and the standards that go with that. As we add more vendors to these constellations, we have to work through those vendor differences and ensure that we're operating to a common standard. There aren't loss in capability or connection as we increase competition. So this large LEO constellation approach, I think, makes effective prototyping at scale essential. We can't sort of prototype individual satellites the way we might for a different type of program, but it also increases these prototyping challenges. Again, the number of vendors and how we drive competition is going to be a key part of that. Next slide, please. So the other aspect beyond operational utility is repeatability. So as I mentioned up front, these are long-term commitments to what a future architecture looks like. We are really planning for the future and sort of re-envisioning what our defense space architectures will be. I want to kind of focus on three parts of that. So affordability, controlling cost, that is a key component, right? We have to be able to both afford the initial fielding of the constellation, but also the necessary replacement and replenishment that will happen over time. The second part is industry capacity and capability. So we need vendors that are engaged to maintain competition. We need vendors that are engaged, willing and able to execute on these contract awards. And then the third part is having mechanisms for technology insertion. So as General Butow said up front, we must take advantage of commercial innovation. That's the key one of the key drivers to why we're moving to these new architectures. We can't do that effectively unless we have these mechanisms built into our long-term acquisition planning to have technology insertion and to make sure that there's a clear pipeline from that commercial innovation into our defense space systems. Last point on this is that repeatability is clearly linked to operational continuity, right? We have to be able to deliver these systems on time. We have to maintain the capability of the overall constellation. And so the sort of schedule-driven approach that we see is all about operational continuity and ensuring that we're delivering what we need to support the warfighters from space. Go to the next slide, please. I'll quickly touch on this. So I think this is part of the challenge is balancing competition and predictability, sort of another way to think about this. So we see some acquisition approaches that are going to rely more heavily on a single vendor to deliver capability and maintain that capability at the architecture level. And then other organizations like the Space Development Agency that are really pursuing and pushing a competition-first approach. And that is part of the Space Development Agency's mandate, right? They were directed to do that. But it comes with challenges. And I think where we balance between these, the two ends of the spectrum will be really important. So competition will help us deliver innovation, diversity and dynamism in the market. It'll help us avoid vendor lock, and it'll drive to greater modularity. On the other hand, sort of predictability, the having fewer vendors supply these architectures can provide advantages in mission assurance, operational expertise, production efficiencies, and sort of vertically integrated solutions that may help better manage supply chain disruptions and things of that nature. And then I'll just lastly note kind of where we fall in that spectrum will depend on kind of operational urgency. And so we may kind of change what we emphasize over time. Key to all this is low volume and high volume production. So really to take advantage of these larger constellations in LEO, when we get to the hundreds in particular, where kind of the defense architectures are falling, this is a key part. So traditionally where we've been is in a period of low volume production, which is 1 to 20 units satellites. We utilize very customized labor intensive manufacturing techniques performed by very specialized personnel. That is not the future, right? Again, General Butow set me up. He said exquisite solutions do not scale. That is exactly this point. So high volume production really starts based on some prior research we've done at about 50 units in a production line for satellites. It borrows those principles from other industries that have made this shift. And it really focuses on organizing and approving the process and then measuring performance against the process, right? So rather than measuring at the individual satellite level with those specialized personnel, we certify and manage at the process, and then the follow-on units are copies of that process, and so we manage it differently at that level. And then companies that are able to reach and sustain high volume production will have a significant advantage over competitors. So this is true whether they're winning government awards, commercial awards, or a mix of the two. We'll continue on, please. So I have a kind of notional example to help explain this. So on the x-axis here, we have sort of cycles of demand. So think of this as a proliferated satellite acquisition program. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are the cycles. The total demand is represented by that purple line at the top. And then the 3 bars represent contributions from 3 vendors that are contributing to this. So the constellation overall is growing over time as that sort of initial fielding happens. And then each vendor's contribution to that is changing based on those particular awards at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All this kind of to set up that it looks very clean at sort of the macro level, but there's a lot happening under the surface we'll talk about on the next slide that kind of makes this more challenging than it appears. Right, so I have this sort of broken up between those three vendors we saw on the different colored bars. So vendor A is sort of already operating at high volume production. That yellow bar is their capacity, so they're at 75 units, above that sort of 50 unit mark. Vendor B is operating below that, so their capacity is at 25 units initially, and then vendor C is sort of right at 50 units. And what this is meant to sort of explain is what the perspective of competition for these systems looks like from the vendor perspective. So vendor A has already invested in that manufacturing. They're able to produce at scale and trying to capture as much of their award as possible, right? So at the first two rounds of the acquisition, they're doing pretty well. They're capturing a significant amount of the overall program. They have some excess capacity. And then between rounds 2 and 3, they have a decision to make. And so they do additional capital investment to increase their capacity on the assumption that they can continue to capture a large share of that award. So that's kind of the process that all these vendors are having to go through. And this is what we're doing as an acquisition community when we're trying to build in competition to these programs. The vendors have to make these decisions based on their anticipation of the future and what they've achieved in the past. We want as many of them to be producing at that sort of high volume production level as possible, right? That's where they're going to get efficiencies. That's where their manufacturing process is going to be faster and more predictable. And that's where they're going to make the profit that allows them to continue engaging, right? The vendor willingness to continue competing for these awards is a key part of what makes this successful. So this is really, again, notional example just to show kind of how tricky some of these decisions are that vendors have to make and how we're balancing between the competition and sort of vendor viability. Again, building for a long-term sustainable architecture. Last point here is I think sometimes we're drawn to the idea that because we're operating so far above in terms of quantities, so far above where we've been in the past, that we don't have to think about these issues. But again, operating at 300 to 400 units, we're not operating as a space acquisition community at SpaceX scale or at Kuiper scale or the Chinese mega constellation scales. These are still fairly small constellations that we're planning for, and maybe that changes in the future. But right now, we do really need to think about what our demand is, what the acquisition community demand is, and sort of what the vendor capacity and viability looks like. So go to the last slide, I believe. So just very quickly, I think meant to provide some sort of strategies for achieving balance and building resilience. How do we think about this, right? We can create tiers of competition for potential vendors. So we can recognize that some vendors are going to produce at high volume production. They're going to produce at scale. They're going to grow. Maybe they have a vibrant commercial business that allows them to scale further. That is not going to be the case for every vendor, right? It depends on their access to private capital and other aspects. So we need to think about how we're tiering these different vendors and how we're dividing these awards. Sorry, and I'll just note kind of the last piece of this. Also thinking about how we're supporting those companies on the continuum, right? We want to continue competition. We want to have a pipeline of competition. And so how we think about that, the work that DIU and others do to help companies scale is going to be so important across this. So thank you all.
Well, thank you, Andrew. That's awesome. And now we're going to transition to our last presenter, which is Robin Yemin. And Robin, take it away.
Hi, my name is Robin Yemin, and I currently am a senior systems architect at Leidos, although I come to you as a recent graduate. I actually just defended my dissertation 2 months ago at Colorado State, and my dissertation is the application of Agile to large-scale safety-critical cyber-physical systems. Now, what do I mean by that? I really mean I want to be able to deliver at the system level the entire system, not just the software, right? So we've heard of the software acquisition pathway, but I think it should be expanded to go to the weapons right? The weapon itself. And so the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about my research questions. Basically, in a nutshell, I was asking, can Agile improve scale, right? Can it improve the development of a large scale safety critical cyber physical system? Most people look at it in terms of just software, or in some cases, very small systems. So I used a satellite as my experiment, right? Something to leverage. And let's go to the next slide and talk about that. All right, so this is the case study. And, I have spent, 30 years in this industry building a lot of those systems, right? So SIBRs, GPS, AHS, I have a lot of background in this area. And so the number one thing I get asked for customers is, how do you know if we changed how we build things? How do you know it would be faster, right? And that's really what I was trying to solve, because most businesses and the government itself, they're not going to build something twice to prove it. So by modeling the building of it, it allowed me to build it twice. So I used a spec around an existing satellite, created mission requirements, and then created the functional requirements around it, stated a set of assumptions, and then I used NASA's process, right? Their NASA SE manual, and modeled the entire build of the mid-size LEO satellite. And then I developed what I would say would be an Agile model. And part of that, I had the opportunity to interview some SpaceX engineers just to see if I was on the right path. And then I ran Monte Carlo analysis. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. The specification, right? So mid-size LEO satellite, native orbit, launch mass about 250 kg, payload mass, right? I don't have to read all of these things to you. 66 volt system power. Originally, I was going to leverage a CubeSat for this, but I had talked to some folks at NASA and they were like, well, anybody can build a CubeSat, so I was worried that the model wouldn't show, the impact of this change in development unless I switched it up. So it's a much larger satellite. And next. Here's the mission requirements, and I apologize for the really small build, but I built the model in a tool called InnoSlate, which leverages a combination of SysML and lifecycle modeling, right? And the benefit is it allows me to run cost and schedule analysis as well as modeling the system. So the mission requirements are Earth observation, must operate for a minimum of 5 years, stable in low Earth orbit, able to transmit data to the ground, and a modular architecture, right? And it's pretty lightweight, but again, it's more of a model and art of the possible. Next, I'm going to talk about the functionals. So the structure, we had primary and secondary structures, and they needed, integrity, power. We used battery solar arrays, attitude determination, communication functional requirements needed to be able to transmit communications. Payload, we had data collection. Again, it was Earth observation, so I assumed, cameras, things like that. Thermal control, and we verified those. Propulsion and command and data handling, right? So not unusual. It's exactly, the configuration of most of our satellites. Next, I'll tell you about some assumptions. All right, so one of the assumptions is that I needed to make sure that I could ensure safety and security within this satellite. And one of the things that I found as I evaluated the setters, and setters are systems engineering technical reviews. So think of PDR, CDR, TRR, ORR, all of those steps. Well, those steps are also tightly coupled to where we validate and verify safety and security, which is one of the reasons I find that it's very difficult to move to an Agile approach when we're building the system level, because where do you check this stuff? So I developed what I referred to as a plugin to do a continuous verification. And I decomposed all of the setters associated with NASA. I compared them against the DoD traditional setters as well. And then I pulled out all of the things that we were trying to evaluate in those phases and added them to my continuous integration, continuous development pipeline, so that it was a continuous validation versus a tightly coupled to a batch phase gate. And I was able to get some information from a safety engineer at Joby Aviation who is responsible for safety and security in systems, new emerging technologies, meaning it hasn't been codified yet, right? So going back to those first principles. With planning, I assumed for a waterfall an integrated master schedule and all of the work defined before the work starts. With an agile approach, I laid out multiple horizons of planning in a roadmap. Materials and components, this is kind of I had to bound the problem, and I know this is a big problem. I made the assumption that I have all of the parts already, right? So this does not address supply chain, which would obviously be a very difficult part to overcome. With labor and skill, the waterfall assumed a functionally organized workforce, which we normally have. And with the Agile, we had a cross-functional workforce. Integration and test assumed both had test equipment and infrastructure immediately, which isn't always the case, but I do believe it should be. Regulatory compliance for the waterfall were validated at the phase gates, which we are today. And for the Agile, we were validated at both each sprint, which is typically about 2 weeks, as well as the quarter. We had fixed material costs for both, and the labor cost pretty much fixed as well. All right, next slide. This is a short presentation, so I could only give you the highest level work breakdown structure. But if you ever want to reach out and find out more about my dissertation, I can show you that these actually result in quite a detailed work breakdown all the way down to very small pieces of work. So the waterfall has phase A, phase B, C, and D. And I decomposed that same satellite, but I put it into a series of MVPs, minimum viable products, and you could have called them next viable products. Now, one of the things I learned just as you look at this, the results were huge, but the thing I did not take into account was concurrent engineering. And once I show you the results, I think I could have them again if I applied concurrent engineering to this. Because of the modular architecture, assuming we have the resources, there's a lot of things that could be done in parallel. All right, next slide. So this continuous assurance plugin, and I called it a plugin because basically I don't think we need an entire new model, an entire new framework, like waterfall, or an entire framework for Agile. I think there's a lot of good stuff out there already. And my opinion is we should stand on the shoulders of those giants, and that's what I'm doing. So a plugin are the things that I need to update or augment in the process to enable me to, like I said, ensure that I build in that continuous safety and regulatory compliance. Things that I needed to add were, hazard analysis and fault injection, intent-driven development. And then I needed some additional tools. So, making sure I have a contiguous, ongoing, cross bidirectional traceability matrix. And I needed to expand the scope of continuous integration and development in order to apply it not just to software, to hardware. And I did get to try some of this out during some basically experiments. I was able to work with Orbit Fab, which is a small company, and they let me, kind of play with this with their environment. All right, next slide. Here's the results. And again, they're pretty small. And this model actually deep dives much, but basically it takes me half the time to build the exact same satellite meeting the exact same safety and regulatory requirements as it does for my mid-size LEO satellite. In addition, my standard deviation is much lower, meaning my predictability is much higher. And many of those is resulting around the fact that I have lower variability, right? Next slide. So what are the observations? Well, 60% reduction in development time. And if I'd showed you the slide, you'd see that it was actually a 75% reduction in cost. I used a triangulation matrix to inject variability into the model, so it wasn't just a straight linear. And what you saw with the larger chunks is bigger batch sizes resulted in longer rework cycles. The simulation reduced that standard deviation. That really reflects that I can shorten both the development time and increase productivity or predictability for the customers. We can shrink the timeline further if we integrated concurrent engineering. There's a lot of things that could actually be done concurrently. And the lower deviation indicates tighter control. Now, just to be transparent, like I said, I also shared this as I got to interview some SpaceX engineers, and they still said that my model still was too structured. They're less structured than that. So it just shows that I have a little too much stink of systems engineering still on me. But I believe that this would allow us to take the software acquisition pathway and move it to the weapon system level. Next slide. And that's it. I probably shouldn't have put questions on here because I'm going to give it back to Bucky to take us forward.
Robin, your presentation warms my heart because the interesting thing in defense, we have, there's the law, which is black and white. There's policy, and we write policy, so there's exceptions to policy. And then there's culture. And usually the greatest challenge we run into at DIU is culture, and how and people get fixated or locked into the best practices of the past. And I think you really illustrated the wonderful benefits of being open to different models that embrace agility. So thank you so much. And I think what we should do is ask our other panelists to come up on camera, and let's go ahead and talk through some of these questions. I know one that's been moved into the answered area, but from John Wall at DAU. I want to pull in this thread a little bit. So what John asked was, how does the Navy reduce the possibility of duplication of capabilities systems across all the branches of the military? And which is always is a general concern. But what I want to do is, from the panelist standpoint, let's look at this from a standpoint of what are the possibilities for improving resiliency, diversity, and ensuring that we actually have the best solution for the best environment. Because obviously, how we communicate in the maritime open sea environment and how we communicate in the high angle terrain like we had in Afghanistan, there's different technologies that are going to be better performing for those environments. But what's your thoughts about this?
I'll just make kind of one comment along those lines. I think what we're seeing in the Forge Act legislation and the executive orders that are coming out from the president is a push to have more demand diversified across the military services. So I think, what Vince's example, I think is exactly what all of the service communities need to be striving toward, which is how do we take technology that's there, that's ready to be fielded, and do the work of working with companies to find ways to make that happen quickly. And so I think we have long been in a place, and I'm a prior government accountability office guy, waste, fraud, and abuse person, but we've long been in this sort of place where we're so concerned about duplication of effort. And I think we're seeing that shift now to say, really the drive for everything is urgency and time to field. and so maybe there is more duplication in that sense, but it's duplication of getting fast and moving quickly. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that kind of thing. So I got to hear some of Vince's presentation about a week ago, and I just think that's a great model for all the service communities to be driving toward.
So
Yeah,
just
Bucky, I would like to add on to Andrew's comments as well. I believe it was actually one of your majors that was at a meeting with PMW 170, maybe circa 2023, that led to a bridging of the gap between the Navy program and the Army program. So those kind of personal relationships and engagement really matter with the different organizations. And I'd like to add that this idea of overlapping capability, and let's couple that with our thoughts on, do we want efficiency or effectiveness in a military domain? And the military domain, the users, we talked about the harsh environment. Sometimes commercial capabilities have a tough time in that environment. So we got to add that into the equation. And maybe we don't always want the most efficient program where one small thing changes and it destroys the effectiveness of that program.
I think another interesting thing is we have new policy out. So you've seen the memo about as a service, anything as a service, right? So from a procurement lens, when we look at all these different commercial offerings, and if we have the ability to bring them in as services, what does that mean in terms of buying power? And also, let's talk also about something strong with MPS, allied integration.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, we have a alumni symposium in South America that we're going to be hosting. We have a broad international community as well. I work with the Institute of Security Governance with Space Domain Awareness in Chile, and we have some students that have led the way. And even General Saltzman made comments on the forward movement with some of our partner nations. One of the aspects I'm also thinking, you mentioned this idea of modularity and being able to bring some things in, and I would offer it over to Vince, perhaps, to even comment on how is PMW 170 in the module. You mentioned the form factor for the modems, perhaps.
I think he said he lost audio. Vince did in the chat. Oh,
Bucky,
Okay,
you're
that
on
might
mute
lost
as well.
Bucky's audio too.
Yeah, sorry. I joined Vince in the in the mute category. While Vince is responding via chat, let's take one of the other open questions from Rich Arledge. How does defense space account for the proliferation of constellations at LEO? The benefit seems to be reduced per cost per unit and more rapid availability, but at a cost of freedom of the skies, akin to freedom of the seas. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll start. I don't think the challenge there is going to be defense space architectures. At least at this point, again, we're not driving toward these massive constellations that we're seeing on the commercial sector. But it, that is going to be a live issue when we think about what kind of peer competition looks like, frankly, right? So we talked about Kuiper, we talked about SpaceX. And there are these competing China mega constellations that are going to go up in orbit. And space is big, but it's not infinite in the places you want to operate. So I think that is an important piece. I think the way ahead is going to be kind of figuring out how commercial industry works together, both in the US and internationally, to develop standards and norms for how we accomplish that, because we don't want to lose access to LEO. And we want to make sure that there's a sustainable future there for all the capabilities, right? So there are some natural limits that we'll run into. I don't think it'll be on the defense side necessarily, but but as we've all kind of mentioned on this call, that commercial piece is a big part of what we plan to leverage as well. So yeah, really difficult question. I think the way ahead is kind of unclear, but it's going to be increasingly important in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think Grinch teased at the beginning the orbitology, and as we all know, the geosystems, it's about 300 millisecond round trip, speed of light to geobelt, but it's only like 10 milliseconds to these LEO systems, and we're just now starting to see a new entry of systems that will hopefully be able to operate in the very low Earth orbit regime. So, what are some of the trades with the orbitology in terms of these future systems?
Yeah, well, certainly, there's latency is one, but also field of regard, right? And so the proliferation associated with the necessary proliferation associated for field of regard, the lower in the altitude that we are, so that affects. But we also have medium Earth orbit, things like O3b, some of those other folks that are still there and actively being used. So we certainly have trade-offs that have to be played out associated with that. But as we look at the larger sets of architectures being put in, and you mentioned the G60 Quinfang, the Chinese architectures, and then look at the altitudes associated with them, and then what are some of the unique interactions between those altitudes and how close they may be, and are they above your satellite? Are they below your satellite? What kind of beam structures might you have? How can you access those? Do you have unique access? Do you have? Is it close? Are there jamming? Are we looking at the electromagnetic spectrum and saying, well, and it was interesting because Starlink just got an authority to be able to change some of their beam structure and the power, the IRP coming out of it, so that because there was concerns. We've regulated this from geostationary for a very long time, so there's a lot of interaction, a lot of trades that certainly have to be made. And I think Vince got one of the slides up there, shows some associated with that modularity and how do you pull in different capabilities. I'm not sure if we can highlight his slide. It's a little small. I'm trying, but I don't think I have access, but it's okay. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you see kind of a mobile case that shows, some of that accessibility. And, one of the things and what I was trying to highlight, I'll just fill in for Vince a little bit, was the idea that creating this modem structure and looking what the equipment actually is and giving the industry a form factor and say, please put your form factor allows for us to incorporate anybody that is willing to, anybody that's willing to fill that form factor. And now you suddenly have access from a terrestrial, a service-led architecture, system. So that's really exciting, and that's one of the structural ways to get at that problem.
Great. A question from Siddharth Meany. What can we learn from big industries or corporates such as FedEx, Amazon, Apple that could be leveraged into our acquisition system?
So one of the things I would consider, I have a few friends at Amazon, is that, and it kind of drives back to that original discussion too, when we have this duplication of effort. One of the things that I learned when talking to some of the executives from Amazon is that they made a they made a specific approach to their organization, which would result in maybe less economies of scale, but faster speed of delivery to the customer, right? They were like, you can't have both. Our number one priority is speed to our customers. So in some cases, they'll have different groups that potentially could be having overlapping work. And they said, actually, it's not as bad as you think because of set-based design. It allows us to evaluate some other options that they hadn't thought of. So I think really looking at how we optimize for speed as opposed to economies of scale could potentially be helpful to us in the future.
Oh, I totally agree with that too. Okay, let's see. Dave Sanchez, what are your thoughts on the trade-offs between in situ repairable space systems or attributable hardware? Is a solution a solution a combination of both? And I definitely have strong opinions and thoughts on this, but I'll let the panelists talk first. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of strong opinions on this. So I'll just say for the Leo constellations, I think this is, we're not seeing this as much a part of the conversation because the timelines for operation are so short. Part of that is, part of the reason for the short timelines is that you want to maintain the capability. You're worried about the operational life of the satellite, but part of it is also kind of having that tech refresh aspect as well. I was in Albuquerque last week, and General Bratton was there talking about refueling, and his comments were picked up in some of the trade press. And his basically on refueling, it's what is the military utility for me right now, right? And I think there's a lot of effort in industry to figure out different ways to do ISAM and SML work, but we have to make that connection to the warfighter and really prove out those use cases. And I think a lot of that, isn't there. It's sort of exploratory, and I hope we continue kind of to incentivize that kind of exploratory work. But it's really demonstrating I think the defense space community is really waiting for industry to demonstrate that clear use case and that clear kind of operationalization to prove that it's going to provide a real capability.
I think one thing that's clear is industry will likely lead the way in this. If you look at, I'm trying to show my mobile phone, right? So if you look at that kind of technology, it's really optimized to really maintain technological relevance. And most of it's done through software. And the DoD moving to software-defined platforms has been really, really important. And I also think that with the distributed architectures, things like compute at the edge, they don't all have to reside on the same satellite. So as mobile, the telecom providers integrated services so that everybody doesn't have to be with one carrier. I think this is the future of hybridization in the space layer, and I think that's going to be great both economically and for national security in the end game. And when satellites are just like cell phone towers, nobody cares about them. I think that they always want to look at how many bars they got. I think that's going to be great. Let's see. I think we're coming up on time, but I think maybe we'll take one more question. And let me pose something to you all. So obviously, we grew up, at least my generation of warfighters, we grew up in a very low bandwidth, very very simplistic, but relatively good communications environment. Now everything's broadband, and when you consider the fact that for most of our space history, we've left more data in the space domain than we've brought back to Earth. And so what's the potential for this from across the services in terms of being able to leverage broadband, especially through optical networking? Yeah, maybe we'll go around. Robin, you want to lead off?
So I think it's a twofold, right? I think there's obviously there's huge advantage, right? We can communicate better. We'll have much faster communications. We've connected everything. I think the thing that we didn't have, and that's kind of my generation too, is the attack surface that we do, because once we connected everything and we created this, we also created a huge an area that we absolutely have to figure out how to secure. And so those are the two things. I think it's a double-edged sword.
Totally agree. Andrew?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think one thing that commercial industry does really well that the defense acquisition community struggles with is sort of user experience and user interface. And that is something we're going to have to get much, much better at. Because, like you said, it's the amount of data is going to be massive. If you're just dumping that on the user and you know relying on them to sort through and figure it out, it's going to be overwhelming and not useful. So I think the tools that we have to improve the user experience are going to be as important as anything that we do. Some of that is going to require, as you said, edge computing, kind of data fusion technologies. It's really going to be about bringing those streams together. And one of the kind of corollaries I think about is prior work I've done on nuclear command control and communications, right? We have very specific timelines for presidential level decision making in that context. So it's not about providing as much information as possible. It's providing the right amount of information that's actionable. And so I think that needs to be a huge point of emphasis for the community. It's something we've not done well historically, and we need to center the user in all of these changes in all of these architectures.
No, I absolutely agree with that. Grinch, thoughts?
Yeah, very briefly, I'm glad that you mentioned the broadband conversation, specifically optical, because signature management is one of the major challenges and issues associated with that. And with optical, we have the technological opportunity to get to low probability of intercept, low probability to detect, to maintain those pathways in a tactical environment. And it's very important.
Yeah, I would encourage all the students on board and maybe future students that this area is ripe with topics to look at. And, anything from achieving economies of scale to how we integrate and benefit from these integrated architectures. I think even more so is that we were very proud 25 years ago when we could take all the video from an unmanned aerial system and beam it back to Virginia, and today we go, well, why would you ever do that? So, but Andrew emphasized the importance of there's data, there's information, and there's knowledge, and what we want to do is we want to take the knowledge that's provided to the president in a very strategic way, and democratize that so that the warfighter at the tactical edge can have the best situational awareness, have the most time to make the best decisions, and that's an asymmetry that is timeless in the history of warfighting. So with that, I want to extend a thank you to all of our panelists, all of you who participated, especially to Vince. He was challenged with video and now audio, but we all enjoyed his presentation, and thank you all. And with that, I'll turn it back to our producer. Thank you.